This video is supported by Skillshare. One undeniable fact of the smartphone industry in the last several years is that the Chinese brands are on the rise. Think about it. Xiaomi was founded 8 years ago with no prior experience whatsoever. Its rise in the world is almost as fast as Nokia's fall. Peter Lau founded the company OnePlus together with Kailun, and it produced one of the best received smartphones in the world, and that's only 5 years ago. In the same year, Samsung was still dominant in China, selling 1 out of every 5 smartphones, and now Samsung takes only 1% of the Chinese smartphone market share. We can talk about protectionism and nationalistic sentiment all day, but the fundamental fact is this. Consumers are the best judges for a product, and the verdict is and continues to be, we choose the Chinese brands. If the numbers in China is not convincing enough, here's the number in the EU, India, Southeast Asia, and Africa. The Chinese manufacturers are doing something right. So what is it? Well, genesis goes all the way back to 2011. Some older audiences of this channel probably remember this, especially if you've lived in China. That was a period of copycats and feature phones. Apple came out just 3 years ago, and all other companies were scrambling to get their products right. Nokia was still the dominant player in the market. Samsung, with its tremendous supply chain prowess, was already eyeing on the throne to overtake Nokia in the smartphone transformation. Japanese and Korean brands like Sony and LG were still a big deal in the market, and every businessman in the world were holding one of these. They're called Blackberries. Then the Chinese figured it out. After years of manufacturing phones for various smartphone companies, they have come to the conclusion that they shouldn't be making phones for other people and make $1 on each phone assembled, where their American, European, or Japanese counterparts takes over $100 worth of profits. First man who figured that out was Lei Jun, the founder of Xiaomi. After years of struggling with Kingsoft, he saw the transformation in the smartphone industry and jumped at the opportunity. Xiaomi was born. And as it turns out, he was right. Chinese market was ripe for revolution, and within 2 years, Xiaomi smartphones swept the market and most copycats were dead. Xiaomi's strategy was simple. Quality products at a fair price. If you want to see Xiaomi working its magic right now, all you need to do is to visit India. Xiaomi has a huge fan base there, just like it once did in China. This marks the first wave of the Chinese smartphone revolution. During this phase, Chinese brands were very much domestic and have no influence overseas. The second phase started in 2013. This is the quality revolution of Chinese smartphones. We now know that Huawei, Xiaomi, and OnePlus makes great phones. What we take for granted is how innovative they have to be in the last 5 years to arrive here. When they started, the smartphone landscape was very different. iPhone was on the top, Samsung, Sony Ericsson, and HTC was in the middle, and the Chinese brands like Huawei and Xiaomi were still making lower-end smartphones. They have to. Their brands were not yet recognized, and they still need time to grow in capability. This means 2 things for them. 1, they make very little on each phone, and 2, they have to go up the value chain as their users will want better phones in 2 years when their current phone stops working. This phase was characterized by painful product improvements. It took the Chinese brands 5 years to complete this phase, which brings us to the last phase, challenging Samsung and Apple. At this stage, Chinese brands finally arrived at the peak of smartphone value chain. My first encounter with this was last year when Trump started imposing sanctions on Huawei. Here's a list of typical components in a smartphone. As you can see, screens, RAMs, and CPUs are the most important components of a smartphone, and they're the most expensive components because they're hard to make. Samsung used to produce over 90% of the world's AMOLED displays because no other company has the technology to make it. But just last year, when Huawei launched its P30 and P30 Pro, I was delighted to find out that Pro version uses displays manufactured in China. If the Chinese can now produce smartphone displays that are the hardest to produce, the Chinese are now on the peak of the technology ladder. This argument becomes clearer amid the Huawei ban. We now know that Huawei has the capability to produce the world's leading premium smartphone chips, Kirin 980, directly competing with Apple and Qualcomm's chips. So far, this video has been a historical account of how Chinese smartphone companies succeeded in each phase. But the truly interesting question about their success is not how they succeeded, but why they succeeded, especially considering the fact that there has not been any technological disruption in the smartphone market. The Chinese did not create new technologies that are better. In 2007, the top 5 smartphone makers are Nokia, Motorola, Samsung, Sony Ericsson, and LG. And here's the thing. Without significant technological disruptions, the norm should be that status quo continues and superior capability prevails, let alone getting disrupted by an army of companies that come from the same country. The status quo requires that the American, Korean, and Japanese and European companies stay on top because they are more advanced. But in a curious way, the Chinese got a chance and they seized it. The foremost opportunity that was handed to the Chinese brands is their 1.3 billion people domestic market. At the beginning, China was a virgin land where its potential was not yet clear to bigger international corporations, and the Chinese purchasing power was not yet proven. International brands were still contesting in traditional markets like EU, America, and Japan, and they're trapped in their internal strategy to get a better portion of their existing pie instead of making a bigger pie. This brings me to another interesting point regarding corporate mentality. Not only have they not realized the huge potential of the Chinese market, they were complacent in their market positions. Let's be reminded that in 2008, when the iPhones were just introduced, most smartphone companies looked down upon Apple, and rightfully so. Sony, LG, Motorola, and Nokia has been making phones for decades, and Apple was a complete newbie. Their advantage and experience eventually become their downfall because they see iPhones as a competitor, where the Chinese brand saw iPhone as their market leader and in many ways, their teacher. Founder of Xiaomi, Lei Jun, are famously vocal about his admiration of Apple, and we all remember how Xiaomi copied the iPhone designs in their early days. Another advantage for the Chinese brands was the increasing modularized industry. This means anyone with resources can buy most components if they want to. It is clear that without Samsung screens, Qualcomm chips, SK Hynix RAMs, and Japanese batteries, no Chinese brands would have emerged. This existing supply chain gave the Chinese a fighting chance to the market. Combining with the tremendous market potentials and the relentless entrepreneurial spirit of the Chinese people, a new age was born. This finally brings us to today, with Huawei overtaking Apple as the second largest smartphone maker in the world and selling even more phones this quarter than last. We're at the final phase of the rise, the hardest phase. Will the Chinese brands overtake Apple and Samsung in the premium market? I'm not sure. But one thing is clear, the real competition has just begun. We're living in a very dynamic business world right now where opportunities are literally waiting for us to discover them, just like how the Chinese smartphone companies seized their opportunities in the past 10 years. But opportunities only come to those who are prepared. That's why I'm recommending Skillshare to you. Skillshare is an awesome online community with over 25,000 classes in analytics, business, technology, and more. Want to start your own company? Why not check out this fantastic Skillshare original course on entrepreneurship? It takes you from brainstorming startup ideas to validation, from creating your first MVP to building the team. All of that taught by a seasoned investor, Albert Wang from Union Square Ventures. I like this course a lot. And join the millions of students already learning on Skillshare today with a special offer just for you. 2 months of Skillshare for free. To sign up, visit the link in the description and get 2 months of unlimited access to over 25,000 classes. And after that, it's $99 a year, which is only $8.25 a month with an annual subscription.